Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Isabel, and I am the CEO here at Startup Canada. I am delighted to welcome all of you here today. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am on is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. We would like to encourage each and every one of you to take a moment to acknowledge the land that you are on today. Startup Canada has been busy curating experiences for entrepreneurs, both domestically and internationally, to have their voices heard and connect directly with advocates in government that are championing the needs of entrepreneurs. This program, titled Startup Gov, formerly called Startup Canada Day on the Hill, is one of Startup Canada's flagship programs with a strong mandate to provide every entrepreneur with a voice to government to create the conditions necessary for entrepreneurial success in Canada. It has been so inspiring and moving to be privy to so many of these different conversations that I have been engaging with since launching Startup Gov in July. Now, during Small Business Week, we are honored to further illuminate these themes and topics through the events that we have curated all week long. None of this would be possible, however, without our key ecosystem partners, including our co-presenting partners, UPS and Intuit QuickBooks, national partners, MasterCard, BDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service, community partners, Scotiabank, Google, NACA, and the Village Hive, and our event partner, Magnet. Thank you so much for supporting all of these efforts in championing the needs of Canada's entrepreneurs to government. The event that all of you are tuned into today is called Stronger Together, Connecting with Communities and Local Ecosystems. And we're going to be focusing on how entrepreneurial support organizations are enhancing and extending local ecosystems and providing support for inclusive community growth in remote and rural locations. The panel will also discuss the role that technology plays in all of this ecosystem development. Leading the conversation is the incredible Mary Doyle. Mary is not only the founder and CEO of Rural on Purpose and a Startup Canada community leader, but also a really dear friend of mine. Now, a few fun facts about Mary. She describes herself as a crystal ball engineer. I love this. Equal parts futurist and problem solver. She is a writer, speaker, program developer, and consultant with over 28 years of experience working in all three sectors. She has been recognized in all areas of her professional development, being named Business Person of the Year, a Canadian Woman Entrepreneur Icon, and receiving a top teaching award for the most outstanding qualities of scholarship, teaching ability, and character. While entrepreneurship is at the heart of all of her work, she sees it as a way of thinking and acting to bring about change in any area. I love that. She is fearlessly optimistic and challenges people to have faith in the future as they work to make a difference. It is now my pleasure to pass off the virtual stage. Mary, over to you.
So much for inviting me to participate in this. I am so excited. I hope everybody who is watching is really excited and ready to participate, because I want to hear from everyone, panelists and people who are watching this, because it's such an important discussion. For those of you who don't know Rural on Purpose is a social purpose business that I helped start 4 years ago. And it was built around the premise that entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial ambition are critical for rural health and prosperity. And we still believe that today. For the past 4 years, we've tried to foster an environment where people have ideas and they act on them. And we've run community pilot programs, workshops, networking events, and presentations. And we've created an awful lot of content around rural entrepreneurship. We've also partnered with some pretty amazing organizations, and Startup Canada is the leading one that we work with. And we are so fortunate to be able to be a part of their mandate and the discovery work that they're doing as well. And we've advocated for rural communities at many stakeholder tables. Today, I consider myself a new foresight practitioner. As part of my pandemic professional development, and I'm sure that a lot of you have done your own professional development over the last year and a half. I took a lot of training. I took a training sabbatical and did a deep dive into futures thinking. And I'm certifying in strategic foresight right now. It's a relevant topic, and it's relevant to this discussion, and it's why I'm so excited to be moderating this conversation, because the practice of foresight invites people to talk about important issues on the horizon, to imagine new possibilities, and to work together to build the futures that we want today. So right now, we're building Rural on Purpose roadmap that focuses on the future of rural. And programming is going to begin in January, and there'll be some previews over the next 2 months. So if you're interested in joining in and being involved in that, jump onto our mailing list at ruralonpurpose.com. So I'm really excited about today's discussion, and I know that you're going to want to participate. Here's how you can do it. You can ask questions and you can comment if you're watching on YouTube. That's where you have to be to ask any questions and participate. So jump over to that platform if you're not there already. That's the platform where the audience will be, and your participation is wholeheartedly requested. As I ask the panelists question, feel free to answer yourselves in the comment section. We would love to hear from the group as well. And I have a couple of questions specifically for the audience. So now I would like to introduce our fantastic lineup of speakers and bring them onto the stage. So the first is Alla Dragola-Burke, Director of Parliamentary Affairs and SME Policy for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Next, we have Joelle Foster, the CEO of North Forge Technology Exchange. And then we have Claudia McCoy, Principal of Upsurgence. Hey, Claudia. And next we have Magnolia Perrin, Indigenous Women and Youth Program Officer for NACA, National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. All right, so we have an amazing panel. Fantastic women to talk to you about the leadership work that they're doing and how they're supporting rural entrepreneurs. And I couldn't have picked a better panel. I'm so lucky to be able to moderate this one. One technical note, ladies, when we get started, if we go over time, I will get a message, a top secret message, and I will simply raise my hand to let you know to finish your thought. That way I don't interrupt you. And I expect I'm going to be doing that a lot because there's a lot to say about this topic. And it just means that we're putting a ... on the commentary, and we're going to find a way to continue the discussion in social media or someplace else. Right, Natasha? You can give me a thumbs up in the chat if that's the case, because I want to make sure that we can continue the discussion. Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. ... Remember, that's what that means. Okay, so before we begin the conversation, I do want to do a really quick little activity with all of you, and I'm glad you're all on the screen right now. And it's just going to check the pulse of the panel regarding perspectives. There is no right or wrong answer to this, just how you feel in this moment. And it may even change during the course of this panel discussion. I'm encouraging the audience to participate in this one as well. So please comment on YouTube if you want to join in. So I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes on the panel. And I want you to answer this question in your heads. I want you to think about it for a minute. Is technology bringing us closer together, or is it pushing us further apart? I'm going to ask it again. I just want you to think carefully about it and how you're feeling in this moment. Is technology bringing us closer together, or is it pushing us further apart? And the audience can answer this as well. You don't have to close your eyes, audience, but think about this as well. Now, with your eyes closed, I want you to hold up your hands and think about your fingers as a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is 100% belief that technology is bringing us closer together. 10 is 100% belief that it is pushing us apart. And then we've got everything in between. I would like you to show me on your fingers where you feel technology is impacting our communication right now. And you have to, I think because of the screen, you have to put your hands right in front of your face almost. There we go. Oh my goodness. My goodness. Okay, now keep your hands up and open your eyes. Isn't that crazy? You guys are all 4 or 5. So that's interesting. I don't think that I've ever had that happen before. Usually we range right across, but what a consistent panel. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. So in 2 minutes, I'm going to give you each a chance to kind of tell me why you picked that number, just generally. So we can start with Joelle.
All right. So, maybe a couple of years ago, I would have said maybe it's pulling us apart a little bit. Our kids, we all have kids that are on their phones all the time. But during COVID, technology pulled us together. It's what kept us together. It's how we were able to see our loved ones and work with our colleagues. So I would say that we have learned a lot about technology in the last 2 years. We're using it to bring us together. We could go down that dark path again. We just have to be careful.
Okay, that's a good answer. I'm going to ask you at the end again, because I'm curious why you didn't pick a higher number. You sound like you really think that it was positive, but we'll come back. Claudia, you're muted.
The distribution of income along technological lines makes the wealth gap wider and wider, and which I think will create greater divisions within the culture. So, and as social media has developed, looking at technology from another point of view, yes, I do agree that we get to communicate with each other, but more and more social media through algorithms are actually creating divisive narratives. So those are that was the things that I was balancing when I was thinking about your question.
Okay, so that's not what I was expecting from you, which is interesting. That's why I asked these questions, because you and I've had a whole hour-long conversation to prepare, and
Yes.
I didn't expect that one, so you caught me off guard. Alla.
It's going to be a great conversation because I love how we all have similar numbers, but I think where we come from is so different. I see it as technology, up until COVID really helped, I think, create more connections. I mean, if you live away from your family, you can, have a better ability to communicate. If you're a business, you're able to reach, broader audiences, etc. And I think that was really amplified during COVID, where you had to essentially pivot and reinvent yourself as a business owner online. But at the same time, I think technology, just because you see each other doesn't mean that connection is there. And I think that feeling of isolation, I think those Zoom happy hours started and then really fizzled out because it's almost more exhausting doing that than not. So I think that there's lots of opportunity for technology to connect us, but that human to human connection is still so vital. And I think technology almost hinders that that ability for us to go out there, and we're almost losing social skills in a way. For me, I cannot wait to get back to in-person conferences, eat my rubber chicken, and just meet people, exchange business cards. Remember those relics? It's just not the same, as in technology. So for me, I think there's so much value in it, but at the same time, we cannot put all of our eggs in that one basket and forget the rest of it. So that's why I'm at 4.
That's great. And I like the idea that there's so much potential, because I think even as technology changes, we start creating more opportunities for connection in different ways. So I think you mentioned potential, you mentioned the way it exists right now, and how we aren't connecting on that same personal level. So I agree. I'm looking forward to the rubber chicken as well. So I'm with you there. Okay, Magnolia.
Yeah.
I love your name, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I was pretty torn. I went with 5 right in the middle. Thought I'd play it safe. No, I'm just kidding. But, for me, I just think about, even in my personal experience, being living in an urban area, being in Ottawa, having good access to Wi-Fi, and, being able to be really connected. But then I go home and I visit my family, and I have trouble connecting to Zoom calls or I was trying to, join this meeting today, I would be struggling with, good internet connectivity. And I'm sure this will come up later in the conversation. But I know you just, even from that personal experience, that, sometimes depending on where you are and, the wealth gap that was mentioned earlier, I think that's another really important way that, it impacts access to technology. But yeah, I agree with, all of the other panelists. There's definitely lots of opportunity to connect, through technology. But at the same time, I think it's really about access, who has access to technology. Thank you.
I love that. I think that it's going to, every single one of you answered it in a way that was going to lead into questions that we'll be discussing later. And you each have a different perspective. And I love that you're bringing all of your experience to the table. Magnolia, I think that access question is a really, really big one. And we can't discuss rural and technology without touching on that. So even if we're talking about the future, when everything, imagine everything is fixed and everyone has high speed. We don't today. So that changes the whole discussion. I'm just going to add a couple of things in here, and feel free to jump in before we move to the questions. We got some comments from the audience. That's why I'm looking down. I'm looking at my phone, and I'm getting some of those questions. So a comment: technology has a part to play in connecting us, but we need to focus on making real connections in the community. And we heard that echoed in the discussions, your feelings right away. And another comment was, technology is lowering barriers of all kinds: ability, geographic, financial, and even language. So that person obviously feels that technology is making a really big difference in connecting us. So any thoughts on the audience comments? Yeah, go ahead.
It depends on when you ask the question, it really does depend on what technologies come in mind, right? I mean, technology can mean a whole host of things. So it would be a great exercise when we talk about technology. Are we talking about manufacturing abilities? Are we talking about social media? Are we talking about things that are connecting us online capabilities? That may or may not be the cluster of technology that we're thinking about when you're asking the question. So I think it really depends. And it also depends on what you define as community as well.
Yes, that's exactly right. Jump in, Ella.
Yeah, I think, I agree with Claudia on all fronts, but I also would say when it comes to, opening yourself up to, people of similar backgrounds or languages, etc., digitally, I think that's so important. But at the same time, we can't let that replace the need to have that feeling of welcomeness and inclusivity in real life, in communities. So I think that it has to be twofold. It can't be one or the other. And I think as we talk about technology, there's so many benefits that it provides. I mean, Claudia mentioned manufacturing. There's a big skills shortage in Canada right now. Automation is one of those things that I think we have a tendency to think is going to take away jobs, but it's actually an opportunity for us to help fill gaps. But how can we also make sure that we're not losing that human to human connection and doing the hard work sometimes in person that is required to help us grow and succeed as a business community across Canada?
I think that's why asynchronous learning is so relevant right now, because it's the use of technology and in person, and it depends. I mean, what we're doing with our incubator is we're developing both, because people in rural communities can't come in here for the training. So we've ensured that everything is online. But then it comes down to that big elephant in the room. Do they have access to high-speed internet?
And all of those points are perfect lead-ins into what we're going to be talking about next. So I am going to ask you to talk a little bit more about your own specific organizations in a second. I'm just going to set this up a little bit more, because we could take technology into all kinds of different areas, as you've all pointed out. So let's dig in and drill down a little bit. So thank you, panelists, we are going to be digging into the topic of technology in terms of ecosystem growth, diversity and inclusion, and building a more equitable future. So local communities have their own established ecosystems that support business development and growth. And we all know that. You've all identified that today. But today, because of technology, individual entrepreneurs in those ecosystems and communities have the ability to extend that ecosystem of support into new communities that are geographically dispersed. So they're outside of their home community, their hometown. Startup Canada is a perfect example of a geographically dispersed community that entrepreneurs can belong to. So is Rural on Purpose. We have people in communities all over the world that belong to Rural on Purpose. So there is a place for those organizations. This provides an important opportunity for diversity and inclusion where the population of the local community may not be able to support it. So being able to connect with a group who share the same culture, perspective, expertise, and struggles is critical for entrepreneurs. And I think that we'd all agree on that one. So my first question to the group, and we'll go through again everybody individually, is what unique lens does your organization provide? And what does it offer in terms of support for rural and remote entrepreneurs? So go ahead and give us your pitch. So we will start with Magnolia.
Sure, thanks. I'll maybe just mention, for those who aren't familiar, I work with the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, known as NACA. We're a national organization, membership driven. Our members are a network of over 50 Aboriginal financial institutions across Canada. We commonly refer to them as AFIs. And it's that network of AFIs that are actually Indigenous owned and controlled community-based financial institutions that work very closely with Indigenous entrepreneurs across Canada, so First Nations, Métis, and Inuit businesses. And they provide lots of different business support services, from coaching, business guidance and advisory services, aftercare, and then a big part of what we do is provide loans and capital to Indigenous businesses to start or grow their businesses. And the whole reason that the AFIs were created was because there was a need in our community for access to capital. And many Indigenous entrepreneurs, faced lots of challenges, due to eligibility criteria or, even being in, close proximity to a financial institution. So really our AFI networks work closely with Indigenous entrepreneurs in urban areas, but many of the clients that they serve are based in rural and remote areas. As I mentioned, they're all over Canada. We have some, in Canada's north. Some are in urban areas. Some are in more of those more rural and remote communities too. So they really play a huge role in kind of filling the finance gap and business support services that Indigenous entrepreneurs, particularly those in rural and remote areas can access.
I didn't realize it was such a full service organization. So that's amazing. You're touching on every aspect of that entrepreneurial journey, and you're providing that support. So I think that's fantastic. I can't wait to learn more about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We will next ask Claudia.
My name is Claudia McCoy, and I'm the principal of Surgeons, and we are principally an engagement firm. We also do a lot of cultural and trade missions. Last year, just before COVID hit, we were able to sneak in a trade mission between Brampton and Lagos. It was Brampton's first trade mission in the Black diaspora and an African nation. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to building out, one of the things that I discovered in Lagos is a lot of potential of rural connections to emerging economies and businesses within the Black diaspora, namely the Caribbean and African nations, and beyond within the Black diaspora. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more. And about that. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Claudia. And I know what you just described is just this small portion of the work that you're doing. And if you have a conversation with Claudia, you're going to end up a partner with Claudia before the end of the conversation, doing some kind of work. I know that. Thank you for that. And now for Joelle.
Hi. I am the CEO and original founder of North Forge Technology Exchange, and we're an incubator accelerator located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I came in as CEO right when COVID hit, so it was a bit advantageous in terms of our programming. So we were able to, when we created, basically just took North Forge and took it down to the ground and then rebuilt it. So in the last 18 months, we've built a 4-stage founders program where we work with entrepreneurs who are tech enabled in science or advanced manufacturing. We're able to work with them in every corner of our province and actually across Canada if they wish to join, because it is digital. And we oversee the largest fabrication lab in North America, where we help inventors and makers commercialize their products. We started an angel network during COVID to help our founders find that access to capital that is desperately needed. And then we realized that women in innovation were facing some tremendous challenges. So we started up, we're starting Women in Innovation Lab, we call We Lab, to help female founders in tech and advanced manufacturing face those unique challenges that they're having right now. We hope in less than a decade, they don't have those challenges anymore, but right now they do. And then we offer programming to high school students and Indigenous students and youth around starting a business, because we all know how important that is. And then we also just are launching a Women's Equity Lab Manitoba, where we're encouraging women who want to invest in technology companies to learn about investing. We have a whole educational portion. They put in $5,000 maximum, and then they can learn the investments modules that we're offering and become part of a tech company. So it's empowering women in our province as well. So that's a little bit of what we do.
That's a lot. And that's amazing that you were able to get all of that in that short little period of time. So you've got your elevator pitch down. It's awesome. I didn't like most people, becoming the CEO of anything during COVID would have been a nightmare. It sounds like you just took it and you ran with it and you built and built and built and built, and go Winnipeg.
Yeah, it's funny. We're the only incubator accelerator in Canada right now where we deal with both male and female founders, all executive female team.
Wow.
So I think we're imparting some unique, I think those soft skills and stuff like that, some of our founders have found that very beneficial from us.
That's excellent. And we'll talk more about that again. And you and I will probably connect offline as well. And now, Alla, let's hear about the Chamber of Commerce.
Perfect. So I'm with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we are Canada's largest business industry association. We represent over 200,000 businesses, as well as over 150 business industry associations. And primarily that's through our chamber network. So our local chambers of commerce and boards of trade that are located in every region and every province across the country, the provincial and territorial chambers of commerce, as well as the business industry associations that are, have that sectoral niche expertise. So, advocacy and connectivity of businesses to businesses is kind of our bread and butter. But we also offer a lot of products and services to our members for everything from, carnet services for those who are exporting and going through customs processes to document certification, as well as other, products and services through partnerships with our members. But I think COVID really highlighted the value of being part of a larger network, because when you're going through something as challenging, as transformational as COVID is for so many small businesses, doing it together is easier or better than doing it alone. So our local chambers of commerce that were really on the ground and talking to businesses from all parts of Canada, and being able to say what's happening in your community and how can we help, and working with the federal government to, get these really essential programs that so many small businesses relied on through, I think was very instrumental. And just that chamber network of being able to talk to another small business in a different part of Canada and saying, what are you doing to help solve the same problem that we have? How can we work together, et cetera, et cetera. I see you on my screen, so I'm like, that's my signal to stop talking.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't.
Oh no,
I
it's all
didn't.
good.
Even if I got it, I didn't notice that I was listening to you.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah.
I'm nodding because I love the fact that your organization connects local to a national network, and that advocacy is a big part. And I think that when we think about Chamber of Commerce, we think a lot about that advocacy piece because it makes people feel like they're not alone and you represent them. But that you reminded me again of all of the products and services that are a part of that membership and how important they are. So I thank you for doing that, because I think that people need to see that whole picture again. So thank you for that. And before I get to the next question, I want to ask the audience who is listening to put, if you are part of an organization that supports entrepreneurs, particularly in rural communities, please share in the chat, in the comment section of the YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and tell us what you do and give us a heads up so that we can share that as well, because it's so important that everyone who's listening is able to share those resources. So the next part of the conversation, I am going to also bring in our audience, and I'm going to ask all of you a question. I want you to think, when we were talking about communities, and Claudia, you talked about how do we define community and what are we talking about when we're talking about community, and that's part of this whole discussion. When we look at rural communities, when we talk about the physical rural community, the town that we're talking about, that geographic space that is our community, that's very different from these online communities that we're growing, that you represent, that I represent, that we're building around a cause, a topic, an identity, whatever it is. So what I want everyone who's listening to do is to think about how many separate communities you belong to. Think about the in-person communities. It could be in your community, it could be a school committee, it could be your church, it could be a service like AA, that's a community. It could be a sports team. Think about how many, try and add them up in your head quickly, how many in-person communities you belong to. And it's really tough because you'll find that you belong to more than you realize. And then think about your online communities. It might be a Facebook group that you belong to, that you contribute to all the time, or you go back to learn new information. It could be a professional association. It could be a book club online. Think about all of those different online communities that you belong to. Tell us in the chat how many, and whether they are local or whether they are online. If you can think about that and just drop that in the chat. I think that's going to be a really interesting little exercise, because I'm really not sure what the answer is going to be, whether you have more online communities that you belong to or more in-person communities. But I think it's a really good exercise. Does anyone on the panel have a number that they can share, just off the top of your head? Even if it's just one, if it's one side or the other, if it's like, sometimes it's probably easier to think about your physical communities in your town that you belong to.
I would say probably a couple dozen between the online and in person. We're active in church. We're part of our daughter is on the spectrum, so we're part of those communities. And then there's also all the other online ones that are involved for work.
Yeah, absolutely. We work has created all kinds of new communities, hasn't it, that we belong to? Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else? Do you think you belong to more online or more in-person communities currently?
I think this is a really interesting question. I feel like I'm almost having a hard time answering it. Mainly because I find sometimes my online communities are sort of like the virtual extension of my in-person communities, and those are the ones that I'm, if I can, especially during COVID, I think it's almost harder to like, well, what in-person communities have I been part of in the last 19 months that, not faded away, but have moved online. So, um,
Oh,
I think that that's something that is it's hard to quantify too. Is also just like, oh, this is just my life, it's this is my book club, or this is my community, my community center workout class, or what have you. I mean, I think there's so many different things like that that we don't think about, but um even like I think your core circle of friends is a community. I mean, these are your people, right? So or your family. So I mean, I would say, like, yeah, I mean, a couple dozen, and I would say maybe half of them are extended virtually. Yeah.
I had not considered that. How many communities moved online? So they just transitioned from in-person to online during the pandemic. And I wonder how many are going to stay there, and I wonder how many are going to do both and come back, to an in-person kind of presence, as well as keep an online community presence. But that was a really good point. I hadn't considered that a lot have moved online.
I'm having a difficult time answering that question too, because as an entrepreneur, I find myself, my identity keeps evolving as I'm building out my company. And so my communities are changing, my identity is changing. And so I find that, it's, I develop a lot of ideas or connectivity over the internet, but for it to really stick long term, I'm with Ala. I think you really do need that flesh. You do need that direct, or you have to be working on a project with each other to actually have it stick. So you may be transient, and it might be that transient might be necessary and good, but then that long connectivity, that long meaningful, I think if it doesn't move over into real life, then it starts to fade. So it's this balance of like, yeah, I may be in a million different chat groups, I may be a million different but they may not mean as much as one business partner.
I do.
The value of those relationships are also.
I do. And I think that would be that if you were doing a survey with this question on it, I think the follow-up question would be, how do you rate the value of each of those communities? How important are they to you? And, would you miss them if they were gone? And so, to your point, I think that's an interesting question. I'm going to share with you some of the comments that are coming in from the audience. One person said that in person, they had between 5 and 10 communities that they belonged to. And digitally, they had more than 25 communities that they belonged to. So significant increase and we can't interrogate that person and ask them any more questions and find out, well, what kind of communities are they? But maybe they'll tell us in the comments. Someone just said, I agree with Ala. It's difficult to quantify. The world became smaller as more came together virtually. And I think that's a really, really good point. And we had another comment, more online communities since the pandemic started, but they miss in person. So we're getting a lot of the same kind of feedback from people, which is really important. Okay. Yeah. Jump in. You're muted.
Muted.
Our persona online is different.
Mm-hmm.
So the person that I'm meeting online, later on, I find out they're a little bit different than the person. And I'm not talking about bots or anything. It's just, we tend to have a setup. Like, if you got to know me, you wouldn't see this bookcase all the time. You'll see, maybe some dishes and, I guess, who are the people and who are we online as opposed to who are we offline? These are different questions altogether.
Claudia, in all of the work that I'm doing in my strategic foresight programs and my futurist thinking programs, that is one of the biggest questions, because we're going to be grappling with that for a long time to come. Is that digital persona, and the communities that we belong to, do we present ourselves differently? Do other people in the group present themselves differently? And is that empowering, or does that take something away from that experience? So those are questions that are really, really important when we're talking about community and the future of community and how we develop. And all of you represent communities online, and a lot of you represent communities offline as well. So it's also another question, really good question. So these are things that we're thinking about now, and we're kind of trying to process them.
Especially around security. Because online, whatever you say online can stick forever. And you can, I mean, privacy issues, you know, how someone could look back on what you say 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Those things, I'm very cautious. Probably out of all of us, I'm probably the most cautious one around presenting myself online, because I'm just seeing the evolution of the impact of putting too much information, or and information being taken out of context, and how that can impact you. So that's another thing as a caution. If I meet you one-on-one, I'm a little bit freer than having to have to put that information up, and that may hold for forevermore.
Very true.
I completely agree with that. And I think that's a whole other level as well, when we're talking about what is real and what is not real, and online communities and the ability to well, the conversation around misinformation, that kind of thing with online community building. It's another question. I am going to ask that anyone who's in the audience who has a question for any of the panelists or all of the panelists, please put it in the chat, because we will be getting to you and to your questions as well. So ask the questions that you want to ask, and think about the group of amazing people who are here today with all of this insight, and pose a question, because we'd love to hear from you. So we're going to move on to, I have some specific questions for each of you that I'd like to ask, and they're all very related to the topic that we have right now. Is going to be for Magnolia. And this is something that really concerns me. I'm going to read a quote. A disrupted generation of youth is emerging in an age of lost opportunity. And that's a quote from the Global Risks Report of 2021. And that report lists youth disillusionment as one of the top global risks that we face. Youth disillusionment is one of our top global risks. The World Economic Forum is talking about this a lot. So we can't ignore it, and we are, and I'm really worried about it. The other thing is that the pandemic has set women in Canada back significantly in the labor force participation. The participation rate for women is at its lowest in 30 years, and that's according to RBC. Indigenous women and youth are even further marginalized. And I know that that's what you're going to be able to talk about and speak to. How can online platforms support these critical groups in terms of building community, or do they at all?
Yeah, no, those are really powerful stats that you've shared. And I think it's really great for the audience to hear that. And I know with the thinking about, you know, entrepreneurs and women and youth in particular, and diverse entrepreneurs in rural and remote areas too, that's almost like an additional layer of maybe challenges that they're going to face. And, you know, just to kind of, I'll start with talking about some of the challenges maybe in kind of the rural and remote areas, and then I'll kind of move into women and youth. But, you know, we know that when you're an entrepreneur and you're in a rural or remote area, that it can hinder your access to things like diverse markets, supply chains, financial institutions, procurement opportunities. You know, and there's also challenges with, you know, lack of infrastructure in many communities. We already talked about access to high-speed internet or access to technology, or often, we hear the term digital divide and are, referring to individuals living in those communities and how they don't have the same access. And then, I think what's beautiful though, despite all those challenges, that many of these entrepreneurs are actually mobilizing, and they're creating businesses to actually meet a local need or demand, or to address some sort of social need in their community. So I think that's pretty empowering to see too. One of the other challenges though that I've heard from many entrepreneurs, especially since COVID-19, is even like when it comes to recruitment and retention of employees. I know that's been a huge challenge to many entrepreneurs, particularly in rural areas as well. And then, when we're looking for Indigenous entrepreneurs too, there's again another layer of challenges that they face, particularly if they're on reserve. Many of our reserves are in kind of rural or remote areas. And a lot of those challenges are due to the Indian Act, which is a piece of legislation that controls, how things are done on reserves. And in particular, when we're talking about businesses, Section 89 of the Indian Act prevents the use of property for collateral. If an entrepreneur is trying to access a loan from a bank or a financial institution, so there's more challenges when they're trying to access capital. And then we get to women and youth, and again, that's an additional layer, another challenge that they face. And we know, like from our work on our Indigenous Women's Initiative, that women, face those same challenges and more. Of course, access to capital to things like, having a good credit score, or any, credit history for that matter. Having the equity to invest in their business. Also, full-time involvement in their business is often a barrier, especially if they're doing something that's more home-based or part-time, or more of a side hustle, which we also see in youth entrepreneurs as well. And then we know for women that we did a survey of Indigenous women entrepreneurs across Canada, and one of the top challenges was balancing family and business responsibilities. And I think it's that caregiver role, which, don't get me wrong, many men and other entrepreneurs often have those responsibilities too, but they often do fall on women, and that can be a challenge too when they're trying to start or grow their business, among other things as well. I'm not sure how much time I have left, so
no, this is great. I think that the audience is going to want to know about all of the issues and all of the things that you're tackling with your organization, and funding being one of the big ones. Specifically for women, and I think and for youth. You talked about side hustles and side gigs for young people. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, so for the women's side, we're right now actually in the process of launching a new program for Indigenous women entrepreneurs to increase their access to not only loans, we're specifically looking at microloans, but also non-repayable contributions, grants, and things like that, because we know women tend to not want to take on more debt. And then on the youth side, right now, actually, we're about to engage in a larger research project to help us better understand what some of those barriers and gaps, and more importantly, the type of support that youth want to see to help them, grow and start their business. And I think, one thing that's really important when we do this research is making sure that we reach entrepreneurs that are in those rural and remote areas, who maybe aren't already linked into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But yeah, NACA, we have lots of our AFIs who are actually doing great work to support youth entrepreneurs. Many of them run things like entrepreneurial youth camps in the summer or over March break, often targeting high school or younger youth. We have youth business awards. Many of them have actually youth entrepreneurship loan programs where they, ask for things like reduced security and whatnot to make it more accessible. So our network is definitely doing a lot to try to support youth, and it's definitely an area that is a priority for us to increase support. Another big thing, I think this applies for women and youth, is there's a need for mentorship and peer networking and things like that. So we're right now trying to explore ways that we can, I think, and to your point, or to your earlier question around, communities and stuff like that, creating opportunities to bring Indigenous women or with other Indigenous women together, or youth together with other youth is really important. And we're looking at exploring ways to do that virtually as well. Hopefully, one day being able to of course, gather in person as well. But I wanted to note, for Indigenous women, I know there's the Indigenous Lift Collective, and it actually started out of COVID. And, they meet every week, and women get together and can share and network, and they have an Ask Give kind of platform that they do. And it's really been quite successful. And I just wanted to share that. And definitely if there's any Indigenous women that are interested and that are listening in on this call, it's a great support network out there too.
I love that. And you made the comment that you don't make any assumptions about what people need. You're asking them. And I think that's really important, especially with youth, and just to find out what it is that they think they need to help advance whatever their dreams are. So I think that's really important. And are you open to people reaching out? You said that you're looking to build a mentorship program, and you're looking to do that. Anyone in the audience who says, hey, I really want to be involved in that. I want to see how I can help, how I can get involved. Can they reach out to you? Yes,
that would be amazing. We're definitely looking for mentors to be part of this program. So if there's anyone who's interested in giving back, please, I don't know if I can pop my contact information into the chat, but I'm happy to share it afterwards as well. And it'd be great to hear from you if you're interested.
Awesome. I'm getting my hand signal already. So thank you for this. Thank you for telling us all of this information, and we'll be back to you. Thank you very much. And the next question is going to be for Joelle. Hi, Joelle.
Hello.
I'm going to start with something from the work that I'm doing with future studies. It's in reference to something called Amara's Law. And Amara's Law is well known in the futures world. And it states that we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And we know that the pandemic has definitely put this to the test, and you have passed with flying colors, obviously, during the pandemic. You have a unique perspective of being part of a truly local ecosystem of entrepreneurs with a physical building. And not every community can or even should try to build a North Forge. Mm-hmm. But how important is it to connect your community using online platforms to other communities?
Okay, so great question. So youth and rural is a real priority for us. And we know that to keep the youth in our rural communities and in this province, they need connectivity and they need the support from the community. So it's why hubs and incubators like us are so important. Now, there doesn't have to be necessarily a huge physical presence. We're building like fabrication labs in Thompson right now and the PAW, and we're looking at going into Morden and Brandon, and that we're hoping connected with that also becomes that tech incubator where it's bringing people together. So while we understand the importance of this technology, we do understand that you need to have that human connection. It's why we have what we have here, because when you bring entrepreneurs together and they're around each other and they're talking and they're throwing out ideas, it is amazing to watch. And what comes out of that and the connectivity that comes out of that, it's incredible. And it's what's moving organizations forward. Now, we actually have a company called Spontively that has actually started a community platform. And it's so interesting that we're talking about this right now because they're in the middle of a massive raise they've had to go down to the US because they're having a hard time getting Canadian investors to understand the importance of communities. And down in the US, they really understand this well. So we could lose this company to the US. So that's a whole different conversation. But, we have to keep asking ourselves, how will our world evolve in decades ahead of us? What's going to be the new normal for our children? What new products and services will be used? What are the jobs of the futures? And we need to invest in technology infrastructure to spur the economic development, especially in the rural areas. And rural communities are so important in fueling innovation, testing new solutions, driving economic development, and attracting foreign investment. So we have to support these solutions that are strengthening linkages, besides between smaller and larger communities to attract and grow those entrepreneurs and those businesses. And, it's entrepreneurship is the big factor among all of this. We, like you mentioned earlier, gig and the side hustles. That's what it's all about right now. If you aren't looking at being an entrepreneur, your options are limited in the future. And it's where our youth are going as well right now. So we have to really support them. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what everybody on this call is trying to do.
I want to tell you that I appreciate everything that you just said. I agree with everything that you just said. And I think that you're doing amazing work.
Thank you.
And that whole entrepreneurial spirit and mindset and being able to take an idea and create something and build something, and that initiative and that momentum that it creates is so important in rural communities. And thank you for doing that work. And thank you for pushing that agenda. We are going to make an impact. So just keep doing that work because it's important. Thank you very much. Next, Claudia.
Hello.
Claudia. Hi. You have thrown me because my question is going to probably go in a different direction with you now because you have answered everything differently than I expected, which is exciting. It seems like, from what I understood beforehand and looking at your work online, it seems like you're using online tools and platforms to build communities from scratch.
Yes.
Around causes, around ideas. And I was wondering if you see more of this happening in the future, people building these communities from scratch online around a cause. And do you think that this is important? And how do we encourage that or discourage it, whatever, depending on how you answer the question?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize for the fact that there are workmen building on top of my office. They promised me that they were going to give me some time today, but no. But the question is really, it's a really complex question. It seems very simple. On one hand, it's cheaper to connect with people before. I don't know if some of us might be too young to remember those extensive bills that we would get when you were calling, the Caribbean or Europe but essentially you can talk to Lagos or UK for the same amount, right? Essentially, using tools like WhatsApp. That being said, I mean, there's so many definitions that we have to agree on to be able to even answer some of the questions the question that seems simple on the surface. I mean, what is community? What is development? What is good development? Development can either itself can support the emergence of a community or undermine an existing community. And what the word help means. I mean, these are definitions that I hate to sound like a lawyer, but when you walk into it, it was really important that we come together as individuals to figure out, okay, what are the shared values that we're going to read a question like that? I started Upsurgence essentially realizing when I was doing campaigning for different organizations that Greenpeace, the National Arts Center, the Mervish, the AGOs, the Toronto Symphony Orchestras, those organizations had a lot of tools, a lot of built-in connections to actually evolve and fundraise. But many small emerging organizations, or even organizations that are mid-sized, they didn't have those resources. And I was afraid that the diversity of our culture would actually disappear because of the money game. Because a lot of organizations didn't have the connectivity to the community, or the connectivity to the resources. So one of the things that I wanted to do to build and preserve culture was actually do engagements. So first we was trying to find money, but when you're trying to find money to fundraise, whatever, why does someone invest in a cause? Why does someone go into, well, they have to have the shared values. And sometimes the people that are investing in a cause are not necessarily the people that are benefiting from the cause, right? So, right, and especially with initiatives that are not-for-profit or charity oriented. So how do you create that cultural gap and that engagement? And that over time, I started to figure out that was the answer that I needed to answer. That was a question I needed to answer all along. And so I had to figure out from a very basic level, what does community mean to them? Fairness, or shared ideas around having an equal playing field. Some cultures, some communities felt that and some didn't. I was working with the Canadian Cultural Society of the Deaf, a very different concept of what we would call culture. And it was very important that all the stakeholders around the table really understood the shared values and the individual values that are around the table, so that we don't create one, cultural silos that undermine cultural cohesion, and two, we don't create in our blind spots these concepts of what development is and that everybody should align with them. People have these organic selves that should also flourish, and what does that look like, and how much room do we give for that? And how does that diversity? So we have shared values, and then we have that diversity. I think Ala was talking about that. These are very fine balances to bring, but when to find issues to balance between. But when you find those balances, you can have that. You create a larger, unique mosaic that is very important. So yes, those are. So that's the background of the question, and so. And I think I'm just to go back, Mary, you want to know whether or not online communities develop. Is that the question?
I think you did a really good job of answering around that, because you answered it in my mind. You answered it when you talked about empathy. That's essentially what you're talking about. And you're talking about defining things based on a deep understanding of the people that you're working with and you're talking to. And I think that can be done both ways.
Yes, I think it needs to be a co-design, a co-definition, right? And ensuring that the people around the table actually are in agreement with the concepts of development and what community is, and actually what development is to actually develop community in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the times you have stakeholders that when I work in my engagement work, especially the work I'm doing right now in Mississauga, we find that there's many people around a topic of, say, more inclusion or development. And you have all these stakeholders around the table. It takes the process of really unveiling values and needs to actually make those stakeholders transform into becoming a community that's cohesive and actually collaborative.
And I think that's a beautiful way to summarize all of that, because you're talking about that deep understanding of community, and you're talking about it on a very different level from the physical space or the online space of a community, which is important in both areas. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna have to put a ... on that conversation, because it's one I really want to continue. But we're going to move on. We've got Ala, and we've got some questions from the audience. I really want to get to them too, and I want to hear from Ala. So The United Nations, ALA, defines community development as a process where community members come together to take collective action and generate solutions to common problems. Where Claudia is at one end of that spectrum, starting with a cause and building a community, you're kind of at the other end where you represent a large advanced community with established systems. In your opinion, how does online community development help rural entrepreneurs?
That's a great question. And I think that online community development really helps bind rural communities and businesses together to be not just it's a small subset of a region, of a province, but really this is a collective national, range of issues, scope of issues that are impacting rural entrepreneurs, business owners from across Canada. And I think COVID really helped exemplify that, because sometimes I think rural issues get kind of boxed away into over here, and then business is the urban centers and whatnot, and I think that really couldn't be further from the truth. And I think when you have something that is a national and global challenge that's common for businesses of all shapes and sizes from all regions, such as COVID, you do really need kind of that one unifying body to help advocate. And I think that's where the Canadian Chamber really kind of stepped up, and not only on the advocacy side with government, but also coming in and saying, what gaps are there and how do we fill them quickly? So a lot of times, in rural communities, small businesses tend to be, 4 or 5 people, often wearing 3 different hats. So they're stretched thin as is. In a global public health crisis where you have to reinvent your business online, those 3 hats become 6 or 7, and you just don't have the bandwidth, resources, and sometimes skills to be able to do all the things that you need to do for your business to survive, to pay your employees, keep your rent, all of those things. So for us, I think building out the community and being a place where businesses can come together on the local level, regional and provincial level, and find those commonalities. And for us as a national organization to be able to come in and step in and say, what problem do you need solved and how can we solve it? Whether it's, providing accounting services for businesses trying to apply to these support programs and not having enough resources to sift through the, calculus level equations that the federal government has put out for you, to what data are you missing and what do you need to help you do your business? How can we help you access PPE? Can we partner with provincial chambers to roll out rapid tests for small businesses? There's all of these different things that I think being connected digitally will help you execute in reality, for lack of a better word. I mean, I think the physical and connective internet spaces are sometimes meshed, but they are separate. And again, I think just making sure that we have that access to broadband. I mean, it's such a simple thing. It's something that's been there pre-COVID. It's going to continue being an issue past COVID, because just as soon as a community gets caught up to LTE, now we have the 5G problem, and you're always going to be that one step behind. So how do we make sure that we close that gap as much as possible? So lots of issues there to unpack, but I know we have, Q&A with audience. So I just want to make sure we're respectful of that too.
Thank you so much. I'm really thankful to have organizations like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce that are navigating, helping navigate through all of this change and all of this flux that everyone's experiencing. And sometimes it really makes a difference to have an established, long-standing organization that has all of these relationships already that can jump in and provide support. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I think that it's really important, especially during COVID. So great work. And I'm going to ask for everybody to join the stage again, and I'm going to go through some of these questions. You're awesome, by the way. All of you are awesome. Okay, so we had a comment from the audience. We need to let people write, we need people to write their own rules of engagement and build the tools to help them connect in mutually beneficial manners. Rather than do you need me, let's switch to I need you. And it's an empowerment piece. So I think that's an interesting comment. And that came earlier on. First question from the audience. Rural entrepreneurs face challenges on getting exposure to business development opportunities and getting access to cross-industry best practices. What are your suggestions to overcome these? Jump in.
Join your local chamber of commerce is my first step. You know, I know a lot of rural businesses almost, you know, likely already are. We offer a lot of, you know, webinars, networking opportunities, and skills development opportunities as well for businesses. I think that it's so important to always be learning, and connecting with others as much as possible. But also take advantage of other. I mean, there's so many online or virtually accessible community and business support organizations out there. If you're in a specific sector, you know, look into your association that represents your industry. All of my fellow panelists here are in some pretty amazing organizations themselves. So there's lots out there, and I think, you know, I mean, it would say, you know, research, but it can be overwhelming. But I think for me is a good starting point is always your local board of trade or chamber of commerce. They usually have some pretty incredible resources, or are able to point you to some other folks who may have that expertise if they don't have it there in house.
And I'm going to jump in and also add in Startup Canada, because Startup Canada is a great, tremendous resource, as you can tell, you know, just from this panel. And they'll be able to help you out if you're looking for other resources as well. So I'm just going to speak on behalf of them, and then let the rest of you jump in again. Anyone else want to jump in with that question? Okay. I'm going to come, if you think of something else you want to add, jump in. The second question is, do you have examples of rural and remote communities and or organizations that have created ways to make those communities more welcome to entrepreneur newcomers, to marginalized groups, and removing the silos? Anyone have any examples?
Well, I'm not sure if I have a specific example, but I think, you know, that's exactly what our network of Aboriginal financial institutions is trying to do. You know, while their mandate is to primarily serve First Nations, Métis, or Inuit entrepreneurs, they often welcome all entrepreneurs. And really, you know, I think this ties into the first question too. I mean, if you're looking for support or resources, I would recommend, you know, reaching out to if you look on NACA's website, you can go under our AFI tab and you can locate your the AFI that would be in your region or that would service your community. And you know, that's what I always recommend to entrepreneurs who contact me is, you know, get in touch with your local AFI, because they're really the experts, and they have all of the information, and particularly they know what's going on in their region too. So, you know, they'll have that kind of regionally based information that, you know, I might not have at, you know, being headquartered in Ottawa, for example. So that's something I would encourage you to do. We also, I know under our women's program, we've been developing profiles or success stories of entrepreneurs women entrepreneurs who have been supported through our network. So those are also can be found on our website, and I think are great examples of entrepreneurs who have been supported by our network, many of who are located in rural and remote communities across Canada.
Tremendous resources. Like, there's a whole list there. I hope we're getting them, you know, noted someplace so somebody can get a document, because I think they're awesome.
Mary, I just wanted to add a couple. So I can't believe that Claudia and I both have construction going on right now in our buildings. It's like, really? So you're just going to hear this little buzz. It's like I have some bees attacking me from behind. All right. So we have now these things called the Manitoba Entrepreneurial Hubs, where what they're doing is these little hubs in the community where they're helping people who have ideas. And they really are focusing on women right now, but they are going to expand that. But the other interesting thing is I'm on the advisory committee for something called the Inuit Business Hub, and that's going to be opening up in Quebec. And the reason I'm on that is I actually grew up in Nunavut. I've spent 16 years of my life. All my nieces are Indigenous. One of my nieces is Inuit and actually lives in Ottawa. So I'm wondering if she knows you. And then what we're trying to do is get these business hubs in all the different Inuit communities across the north eventually, so that I can help spur entrepreneurship.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to that. And I think that whatever anyone can do to support that is going to be a move forward for rural entrepreneurs. So that's great news. Any other news?
I wanted to just jump in with something really basic that sometimes we overlook. Is just simple exposure. One of the things that I'm looking forward to do with Upsurgence is actually connecting people from emerging economies and from nations to actually come to Canada with some of the unique skills that they have in agriculture and all that, and see if it's transferable. But a lot of times people think, well, you have to come to the cities. And then when they come to the loveliness that is rural Canada, they're like, wow, this reminds me of back home in a lot of ways. So I think when people start to see and explore the beauty, which is rural Canada, that alone is usually breathtaking enough to say, do I, maybe this is a place to put my flag down.
Just to jump off of that, I think that's a really interesting point too, especially as we saw kind of that migration of Canadians from outside of urban centers and moving into more rural parts of Canada during the pandemic. And I think it was eye-opening to a lot of people who sometimes maybe have this incorrect assumption that rural communities are monolithic, and they're really not. They're very vibrant, diverse communities. And I think it's just about making sure that we're highlighting the diversity and the multifacetedness of communities, and having that be a recruitment tactic, because I think retention is one thing, but recruiting people, how do we recruit business owners and entrepreneurs to come to rural communities and set up there permanently? I think that's a little bit more of a complex question that we have time to unpack here, but it's I think, Claudia, that's such an important point, just that exposure. Yeah.
The other thing too is, along with what you're saying, is really important, because a lot of my friends are like, do I spend $2.3 million, I should say billion, but it feels like that for many of us.
Wait 10 years.
yeah, exactly. For, what used to be a 1950s starter home, or take that money and really do a lot of investment and have acreage and that you can build out. So a lot of people are really, really asking, especially after COVID. You make a wonderful point. I mean, when you take away the restaurants, there might be just a new way of looking at living that a lot of people are questioning right now. And I think a lot of people who are newcomers, can they afford the cities and have family? And so they're now looking, I think the rural is just a wonderful place to develop, and win-win on multiple fronts.
That's a great way to end. It was like a perfect. You wrote the perfect ending, both of you. Thank you. So we are coming to the end of this, and on a very optimistic, very positive note, which is great. Thank you all for saying at the very beginning that you were 4 or 5. You understand both sides of that coin, and you're all working towards building communities in whatever format you can to support rural entrepreneurs. Thank you for all of that work. The discussion is going to be a ... because we really are just opening up whole new areas for exploration. I think that the idea of defining what community is going to be an ongoing conversation for all of us. I think that taking what we have locally in that in that ecosystem that we're building in our individual rural communities, and being able to expand it out with individuals choosing how to network out and find more communities to support their work so that they can stay in their rural communities, stay in their homes, do their meaningful work, and have an impact. And that's the whole point of all of this. So people who are living rural on purpose, there are more resources out there than you realize, and more resources that you're already using than you may have acknowledged. So that was kind of the hope, that we were going to discover that at this point. So I think what I'm going to do is I want to thank you all so much. It's only the beginning of our conversations, because I want to connect with all of you offline. I hope that the audience reaches out as well. Thank you, audience, for all of your comments and your participation and your questions. It was truly a pleasure. And I want to bring back Kayla, and thank you again.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Holy moly, we crammed a lot into a very short session. But, Mary, I am always constantly impressed with your beautiful facilitation. You covered so much ground. And I know our team at Startup Canada is going to be coming back to this conversation often as we reflect on community development and community building. So thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today. And thank you to our panelists. There are so many things that, I think everyone can take away from today's chat, and the foundations of what really is a community. What is true collaboration? What is true community development is really top of mind for me exiting this conversation today, that, to Mary's point, will be a ... moving forward, and something that we will revisit. And it really also makes me think around the idea of technology and how we are seeing convenience prioritized over that true co-development, that true, stakeholder consultation to identify what everyone's priorities are and how to make it a reality in a meaningful way, not just in a convenient way. So I think my takeaway and my recommendation to other support organizations listening today and members of our community, how can we really be aware of those blind spots and not just prioritize what is convenient from our lens or from our community perspective, but something that actually prioritizes that true co-built and nation building in really a huge way that acknowledges all these different stakeholder perspectives. So that's sort of my call to action to our viewers today, to think through when we're looking at the economic recovery coming out of COVID-19 and a true inclusive economic recovery. Let's be aware of those blind spots and hold each other accountable. That also takes a lot of courage and time. So if you need support and help, Startup Canada is also here to help really build some of these communities across Canada. I want to thank our foundational ecosystem partners for bringing today's session to life. Startup Gov would not be a possibility without you here today. I'd like to thank our co-presenting partners, UPS and Intuit QuickBooks, our national partners, MasterCard, BDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service, our community partners, Scotiabank, Google, NACA, and the Village Hive, and our event partner, Magnet. Truly, from the entire Startup Canada team, we would not be here without your support, and thank you for really amplifying these various voices through our events this week. For the entrepreneurs listening, we also have another piece of information we'd like to share with you before we wrap up today regarding the Magnet Student Work Placement Program. And this program provides employers with wage subsidies to hire post-secondary students for paid work experiences. We brought this up during the panel around youth engagement, opportunities to provide entrepreneurship, opportunities, build those skill sets. And through the Outcome Campus Connect program, employers can apply for the subsidies and connect with over 1 million student accounts from over 100 post-secondary schools across Canada, all for free. So this is a really great opportunity. You can visit swpp.magnet.today for more information on that program. And thank you, Magnet, for being the event sponsor today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at more Startup Gov events throughout the week. We've got one every single day. And we hope that you enjoyed today's session. From the Startup Canada team, thanks again for watching.